Thank you, David. Always appreciate you. Appreciate your music. Appreciate your witness for the Lord. It's just good to hear you do that. We're going to be leaving in a few days now, and we want you folk to know we love you. We miss you. We look forward to the time in May. We trust, Lord willing, that we'll be back with you. And I always enjoy being here. We have dear friends on the other end of our journey too, and enjoy being with them. But there's something very special about being with you folk, and from now until May, I'll be looking forward to getting back to see you. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you again today. Let me ask you how you celebrate Thanksgiving. It's a thing that probably in most families there's a lot of traditions that have developed around it. When we were quite young, Clayton and I, my dad and stepmom and Clayton and I, and sometimes Eldred, but I know Clayton and I and Mom and Dad used to go up to Lansing. We lived in a little town in Ohio, northern Ohio, but my aunt and uncle lived in Lansing, Michigan. We'd go up there for Thanksgiving dinner. We'd have a great feast together. And I remember one Thanksgiving in particular, my cousin, Flora May, went to Sexton High School. And one of the traditions in Lansing on Thanksgiving was the Lansing Eastern High and Sexton High football game. And so Flora May said, would you like to go to the football game with me? Because Sexton was her high school, so we went, and I still remember enjoying that. Later years, when Clayton and I and Eldred all lived in South Dade, south of Miami, we used to get together at one of our homes, usually Clayton's or Eldred's, I believe, and we'd have they had bigger houses. They're richer than I am. They had bigger houses, so we'd usually meet there, and after far too many calories and far too much food, we would have a discussion about what to do the rest of the afternoon. Some of us wanted to go to the football game. It was Edison and Miami High, which was a traditional Thanksgiving game in Miami. And we would discuss that for a while, and you can guess who was on which side. But that was one that the men usually won, that discussion, because we'd go to the movies. No. And I thought it was because we men just prevailed over the ladies and decided to go to the football game. Just found out this morning that Elaine was the deciding vote, because she always wanted to go to the Edison Miami High football game. And that was Thanksgiving for us. Now, what happens now? Well, most of us probably do like we're going to do. We're going to be together with our daughter and her family, and that's good. That's a good thing to do. That's pleasing to the Lord, I think. But what are we going to do? Well, we'll probably again eat far too much. Then we'll go sit in a comfortable lounge chair and watch football all afternoon, and then say, Lord, I'm sure that you're proud of me for my Thanksgiving. How much of what we really do, while all these things are good, how much of it is really Thanksgiving? How do we express adequate thanksgiving to God? We want to look at the first couple of verses of Romans 12 this morning. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your spiritual service. And be not fashioned according to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds, that you might prove what is the good and perfect and acceptable will of God. What is adequate thanksgiving? Is it what we usually do? Is it having a big dinner? We can do that in gratitude. Is it being with family? We can do that in gratitude. But is that adequate thanksgiving? Is that what the apostle is talking about when he says, I beseech you by the mercies of God to present your bodies a living sacrifice? And so we look at that and we say, well, What can I do? What can I do to adequately express my thanksgiving to God? Well, maybe I can decide that I'm going to spend a little more time in worship this year. I'm going to be in more church services. If I haven't been coming to Sunday school, I'm going to start coming. Or if I haven't been coming to Wednesday Bible study, I'm going to start coming. And I'm going to attend church just a little bit more, and this is going to be my thanksgiving to God. Or we might say, I'm going to get involved in a ministry. You're going to have opportunity to do that. And you might say, well, I'm going to commit myself to another ministry and think that's adequate thanksgiving. Or we might even get real drastic and say, I'm going to up my giving by about 50%. And we'll say, this is adequate thanksgiving. But does that do it? Paul touches something very deep here. And if you have the bulletin there, there's a place to fill in blanks. By the way, when you come down to number 4, not C to this, but the P, it should be W. I gave this to Matt, and I write so poorly that my W probably looked like a P. Not C to this W, but T by the R of our M. Now, we've already touched that. We'll let you fill those in as we go along. What is it that is an adequate thanksgiving? Well, Paul says this, I beseech you by the mercies of God to present your bodies a living sacrifice. Now, what does he mean by the mercies of God? And notice that Paul doesn't command this. He could have. He could have very rightly said, I'm commanding you to give yourself over to God. But he doesn't. He says, I beseech you. Some translations say, I urge you. He's appealing to your own decision. He's saying, in view of, look at what God has done. And I'm asking you, considering the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice. What does that mean? Well, you remember the first and great commandment was you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. That means everything that's in you. And we serve God in this body. The mind makes up makes the decision about what we're going to do with this body, but we serve Him in this body. The Scripture tells us that we're going to be judged by the things we do in the flesh. So adequate gratitude would mean a willingness to say, Lord, I'm yours. This body in which you have given me the privilege of living is not really mine, it's yours. And I say he could have commanded that because over in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19 and 20, Paul says, don't you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit which is in you, which you have from God, and you're not your own. You are bought with a price. Glorify God, therefore, in your body. So some of the things we do, unless we commit our entire being, are really not adequate thanksgiving. We thank God by giving Him ourselves. Paul says in Titus 2:14, He gave Himself for us to redeem us from all iniquity and to purify unto Himself a people for His own possession, zealous of good works. He has bought us. He's given His life for us. And when we look at the mercies of God, we ought to be willing to surrender our very being to Him. What are the mercies of God? Well, there's a lot of little things. I was able to get up this morning and turn on a shower and take a bath. Ever thought of what a blessing that is? We were with our daughter who just purchased a home. Bob and Marty just purchased a home up in Tennessee, and we were up there to visit them just a few days after they moved in. But lo and behold, they found out that the hot water heater didn't work. And so each day to take a bath, we would draw a pan of water and heat it on the stove, and then take it into the bathroom and put the pan down there and use that to spit bath. It was worse than that when we were in Guatemala, because our grandson's water went out altogether. And he had a cistern, and they had to call a water. Now, they had drinking water. They bought drinking water, like something like the Culligan thing here, but they had drinking water. But to bathe or anything else, laundry, they had to use the cistern. And actually, when they refilled it, it stirred up some of the dust or the dirt in it. It was a little bit not too clean. But we had to ration that over there. And we didn't get a big pan. We got a little thing about the size of one of these child's sand, beach sand things, a little about so high and about so big around. And that was our ration to take our bath. That wasn't so fun. But we'd go in and spit bathe just out of that little old thing like that. But this morning I was able to take a shower. Man, ever thought what a blessing that is? We aren't even thankful for the little things, but every day we enjoy them. Blessings of God. And even in Guatemala, as difficult as that was, we were better off than a lot of the people there. Are you thankful that you can go in and take a hot shower in the cold weather or a cool shower in the hot weather? Provisions of God. But it's much deeper than that. Think of what God has given you. Think of the fact that He so loved the world that He sent His Son into this sin-cursed world to pay the price of our sin. Think of the fact that without Him you have no hope of life beyond this life. You have no one to stand with you and sustain you through the difficulties, as we spoke of last week in the 23rd Psalm, one who'll walk with us even through the valley of the shadow of death. Without Christ, we don't have that. As Paul words at one place, you're without God and without hope in the world. And so Paul says here, look at what God has done. Look what He's given you. And realizing that, present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your, and this is the next one, which is your spiritual service. Now that's translated several ways. The King James says your reasonable service. The NIV says your spiritual, your act of worship. The American Standard says your spiritual service. Well, what is spiritual service? In the Greek, it's logikon or logikon, latrion. The word latrion, as some people think, is the origin of the word liturgy, and that's why it's someplace translated worship. It's your spiritual worship, and it's logical or it's reasonable. What does that mean? Well, it means this, that you have the ability as a human being created in the likeness of God to decide what you're going to do and what you're going to present to God. What is your, as a thinking, sensitive, feeling, knowing human being, what is a reasonable or spiritual or logical expression of gratitude? Is it any less than presenting our very bodies a living sacrifice? I may have used this illustration here before, but it's one of my favorites. And when Joel was 4 years old, one of our sons, they're about 4, I was on staff at Lake Aurora Christian Assembly. And one day we were coming down to go to lunch, and you go down a walkway towards the lake and into the dining hall there. You did then. They've got a fine new modern one now. But you went in above it was the dormitory, and down beneath it was the dining hall. And we came around the corner there, and we were walking down that that walkway that goes down to the door to the dining hall, and silhouetted against the lake was a squirrel, hunched up on his paws up in front of me like this. And I said to Joe, my son, Joe, is that squirrel eating or praying? And he said, he's eating, Daddy. Squirrels don't pray. And that's what Paul is saying to us here. You're not an acorn. You're not a squirrel. You're not even just an animated being like an animal. You're a living being created in the likeness of God. You have the ability to reason, and reasoning it out, think, what do you owe God? Any less than our bodies as a living sacrifice? That's reasonable, to give back to Him who has bought our bodies and our souls with the death of His Son. Everything that we are. You've maybe heard the story of the farmer that went into town one day, and he went into the cafe and he sat down and he ordered his meal, his food, and the waitress brought the food. And just before he ate it, he bowed his head and prayed silently, and there were some young wise guys there that were kind of snickering and laughing at him, and one of them went over and said, hey Hayseed, does everybody on the farm do that? He says, well, the pigs don't. And you see, we've got the ability, we've got the logical capability to look at what God has done. And Paul says, looking at that, present yourself, your body, your energy, your strength to God as a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable. That's your spiritual worship or service. What is worship, by the way? What is worship? Well, we try to limit it. There was a lady in the church I once served, and she said, well, I guess preaching is maybe part of worship. And you know, we speak of worship teams or praise teams, and I have nothing wrong with those expressions, but her idea was that you worshiped when the praise team was there, and when that was over, worship was over. And I wonder, do we do much better? What is worship? We think sometimes that we come to worship and from 10:30 till 11:30, or maybe a little later this morning, that's worship. Or if we come to Sunday school 9:15 to 10:30, that's worship. And then we leave and we go out of the building, and the building's locked, and we kind of think, well, worship's over. And we kind of, whether we admit it or not, think, well, God, I'll see you next week. You're locked in your building now. Don't bother me. Worship's over. Worship is not confined to any designated place or time. Worship is acknowledging the worthiness of God. And how do we do that? We do that as we live out in our daily lives expression of gratitude to Him. What is it when a missionary comes to town and somebody says, well, you can stay in our house while you're here? Or a lady sells her home, and she doesn't have a place to live for a few days or weeks, and someone says, well, you come and live with us. That's worship. What is it when Al and Rosie say to that same lady, I know you're going to need help going to Florida, so we'll drive down there. We'll drive the truck, and we'll take another car, and we'll drive you down there and help you get in. That's worship. That's worship. What is it when you see a lady in the parking lot coming out of the grocery store, and she's got a big cart full of groceries, and she's trying to put them in her car, and she's got 3 little ones, and the 4-year-old is trying to bolt and get away, and the 1-year-old is sitting in her car seat screaming her head off. And you go over and say, Ma'am, I'll give you a hand. That's worship. What is it when a 84-year-old guy is trying to get in the doctor's office and there's a 30-mile-an-hour wind and he's on crutches and the wind's blowing the door shut and he can't open it, and you go up and you say, sir, let me help you, and you open the door and let him in. That's worship. What is it when your neighbor breaks his leg and you go over and say, I'll mow your lawn for the next month? That's worship. What is it when your neighbor's sick and you go over and you take groceries and you take a meal and you say, I'll cook your dinner this week and I'll go do your shopping for you? That's worship. Worship is not confined to place or time. Worship is in view of all God has done for us, giving our lives in spiritual service day by day. And that's the appeal. How do you express gratitude adequately? You say, God, I realize everything you've done for me is more than I could ever repay. I'm not doing this just legally, although you could demand that. I'm doing it because I realize what I've received and I'm giving back to you. And then it says this, be not conformed to this world, but present your bodies a living, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's number 4 down there, I think. Not conformed. Now, the translation I use says not fashioned, not conformed to this world. And how strong is the temptation to go along, to not make waves, to be pressured or pressed in or conformed to this world. And we're asked to make a difference in the world, to stand differently from the world, to not let us press us into its mold. The things we hear, the things we see, language today. Sadly, I was talking to a fellow who's been a grandfather for a couple of years now, and the little boy, their first one, didn't speak very soon. And I was a little bit concerned about it. And one day I said, well, has your grandson said anything yet? And he said, yeah. He said his first word the other day. I was carrying him out of the house and something flew against his face and hit him. And he said, damn. His first word. What kind of parents do you think he was living with when that's the first word he learns to say? Or we watch the things on TV that you can hardly leave your set on very long anymore. I would like to spend a whole sermon on the sexual mores that have changed since I began preaching. It's unbelievable. And things that used to be acknowledged as wrong and perverted are now acknowledged and encouraged. And it's so easy. It's so easy to let the world press us into its form. But if we love God and we appreciate what He's done, we're not going to seek that. We're rather wanting to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. We learn to think differently and consequently to act differently. Why? Because of everything God in His mercy has done for us. I heard Doug Dickey years ago. Doug Dickey was one of the pioneers in the Christian Campus House ministry. It was Purdue. He was one of the first ones, at least among our churches, to have that ministry. And I heard him speak to a group of young people one day, and Doug used this illustration. He said, kids, you can decide to be either a thermostat or a thermometer. A thermometer just registers the temperature. It's controlled by the temperature around it, and the reading it gives you is because of the environment in which it is. A thermostat controls that environment. It influences the temperature, the environment. What are you going to be? Are you going to be a thermometer and just register or echo back what's around you? Or are you going to have an influence in this world? Are you going to conform? You going to let the world fashion you? You want to be fashionable and go along with everything the world counts right? Or are you willing to be transformed by the renewing of your mind? Be changed by the renewing of your mind. Well, we need to stop. Realize what God has done. Maybe this Thanksgiving is a time to really count our blessings. Our blessings as a people. Our blessings for the comforts. Our blessings for the little things we enjoy. But beyond that, realize that God spared not his own Son, but freely delivered him up for us all. That's the mercy of God extended, that you and I might be freed from the bondage and the burden of sin, might be renewed, might be made new creatures in him, might know the hope and the joy of eternal life, simply because of what God has done for us. Maybe you need to make an expression of gratitude today. Maybe you need to come and say, I believe he did send his Son. I believe Jesus is truly the Christ, the Son of the living God. I believe that he shed his blood for me. I believe that the horrible things he endured in the trial and the crucifixion were for me, and I want to give him my life because of his mercy towards me. Nothing short of the surrender of ourselves to him is adequate gratitude. Or if you want to try again to make a new start, maybe you've been a Christian, but maybe things have slipped a little bit. Maybe the world has pressed you into its mold. Maybe you want to say anew, I'm going to recommit. I'm going to give my life in a fuller way to the Lord, and I want to present myself to him today. You may do that as our worship team comes. If there's any decision you need to make, any expression of gratitude, and it never will be adequate. All we give is but nothing when we think of what he's given us. But if you want to make some decision today to turn your life over anew, or maybe for the very first time, for the first time to confess your faith, for the first time to repent and be willing to die to sin, for the first time to allow the body to be buried in the waters of baptism, where the blood of Christ contacts you and cleanses your sin, and you're brought forth a new creature. You've never done that. To do so is an expression of gratitude to God. If you have a decision to make, we ask as we stand and sing together that you step forward and let that be known. Would you stand as we sing?